Welcome to a brand new episode of the Defion Productions podcast. I'm your host, Don, the hardest working nobody in Bitcoin, alongside Troy, hardest working nobody in crypto. Typically, on a weekly basis, we talk Bitcoin and crypto. This week, me and Troy have decided to kind of abandon talking. He's actually drinking live on air. I'm keeping it healthy with the Celsius.
This is healthy.
To in some parts of the world, vodka and soda is healthy. Today we're gonna brush really quickly over the Bitcoin and crypto ecosystem, and we're gonna talk mostly in this podcast politics. And that's probably surprising if you're clicking on this video to watch something about Bitcoin and crypto, but little bit of a stagnation in the markets, but there's a whole hell of a lot of shit going on in politics, and I've had some opinions leading up to the last couple of months, and I want to expound on some of those things, and I want to talk about what's really pressing in this country currently in regards to politics, and we're going to dive in on that. But before we do, a couple of housekeeping things. First of all, I want to send a public congratulations to a interviewee that we had months back, Brian Rast, who we interviewed on our channel, Poker Hall of Famer Brian Rast. He finished second in a World Series of Poker event, the 25K, I believe it was the 25K PLO, and it was a score of $1.5 million that he scored. He made in the tournament, and then he followed that up with the 50K high roller that he finished eighth in for about $220,000. And as of about 20 minutes ago, I looked online, and he is still alive in the 10K World Series of Poker main event. It is the largest main event by entrance in history, 10,200 and something players, and they're playing day 4 today. The money bubble burst, and he was still in playing in that tournament. First place in that tournament is going to be about $10 million. So I wanted to make a public congratulations to Brian Rast, as he did graciously come on our channel and allow us to interview him and talk about Bitcoin and ETH. And he talked briefly about his career. But he's a Hall of Famer, 6 World Series of Poker bracelets, almost got his 7th, and he's having a really good summer. And the Defion Productions team is very proud of him and, rooting for him. Got that out of the way. Bitcoin is, I think it was like 58 before we jumped on, somewhere in the neighborhood. ETH is around 3,100. It's been super boring price action lately. Great accumulation time. All the alphas are accumulating, stacking their bags on whatever it is that they're bullish on long term. We're doing the same. The only other thing crypto wise that I really want to bring up, or Bitcoin wise, is I saw about an hour ago that the news broke that former president, potentially next president, Donald Trump, is going to be speaking at Nashville Bitcoin at the end of July. He's going to be a keynote speaker talking about God knows what, because I don't think he really understands Bitcoin very deeply, but he's jumping on the bandwagon, and it's a big deal that you got a former president, potentially the next president, speaking at that type of conference. God, we've come such a long way. I remember watching conferences from like 15 and 16, and there being like nobody there, like literally 100 people in the room. But now we have, thousands and thousands, and we have former presidents and potentially next presidents speaking at these things, along with, the highest net worth people in finance coming here and speaking. It's just wild. But let's talk politics.
What made you want to talk politics today?
Let's talk politics, because the very little bit of politics that we do speak of on this channel, I was pretty vocal about something that I said to our viewers, and I've said to you, and me and Rich kind of talked about, and I'm pretty sure the first time I even said this was about 6 months ago, where I said verbatim, basically, that this election, Biden versus Trump 2, the only option is to not vote in this election. I was pretty adamant about that, and I caught some flack from family and friends who thought that take was ridiculous. But we are seeing right now in real time how absolutely ridiculous our political system is. We all, Americans, got to see two weeks ago tomorrow the current president, who there's been meme after meme, rumbling after rumbling, depending on what side of the aisle you're on, saying he's full-blown dementia to he just, he lost a step, he's getting old, whatever the case may be. We all saw 90 minutes of what could only be described as just a sad experience of watching an old man try to string sentences together coherently. Politics aside, policy aside. And that's the guy running the country right now. And that's who one of the major political parties is trotting out there for you to vote for, right? Mm-hmm. And the other side, you have a guy that's been convicted of 32 felonies, regardless of how you feel about if that should have happened or not. A jury of his peers found him guilty. He's officially a felon 32 times over. He's running on that side. And on the other side, you have a guy that should probably be in assisted living, getting fed his food and telling him how nice he's looking today and combing his hair and letting him play with a doll. That's who we have as our two options to vote for in this upcoming election that everybody wants to tell you is the most important election of our lifetime. And both sides of the political parties are saying you are a fucking moron, and we know you're a moron because look at what we're trotting out for you to choose from. And then you have all the diehard political people that are like, if you don't vote, you're part of the problem. And I said 6 months ago, these two options are awful. And the only thing to do is to not choose one. And I was nuts at the time. In retrospect, because since I made that comment officially, one side has 32 felonies convicted for, and the other side should be in a nursing home, and that's our options. So how are you feeling about that?
Like I said, man, my dad gets on me for voting and stuff, and I tell him I'm voting, and it's definitely...
You are voting?
No, I tell him I'm
Oh, you're
I'm
telling
voting.
him you're voting.
Just to make peace in the house.
Okay.
He'll probably, get slap me or something, but... I mean, he's a diehard Trump, and
my dad as well. My parents
exactly.
as well.
So it's just like, and you try to explain these options to him, and he's just it's one ear out the other. They have their ideologies, they have their belief systems, and it's kind of hard to go back and convince them otherwise, whatever they've already believed, because they're indoctrinated these belief systems for years and years and years. So it's just like an argument I don't even want to talk about. It's just like something I just move on. Move forward, and just like we said in one podcast, like I'm voting orange. Like I vote by buying more Bitcoin. That's my way of voting. So whether it's a ballot, whatever, I'm just gonna buy more Bitcoin.
Prior to 2008,
even though we said we weren't gonna make this a Bitcoin podcast.
Prior to 2008, because 2008 is the first time I ever voted officially, and I was 30 years old. I didn't vote any election prior to that. I really didn't give much thought to politics. I really didn't understand. I mean, I kind of got it, but I didn't really take any time to really try to get it, understand policies and stuff like that. Then I voted, and I thought it was pretty cool the first time I voted. I thought it was a cool experience. I felt like I did something, so I understand people that say that and feel that way, because at the time when I first voted, I felt like it was a big deal. I had one of them stupid-ass stickers that said I voted today or whatever the hell it is that they give you. No, I had it put on my chest like a full-blown dweeb. And but since, as I've really gotten to understand how the system works, how the system operates, and did some self-assessment in personal learning and going on my own journey, and just realizing that it really isn't that important who's running the country. What's much more important is how I operate based on what the rules are. Mm-hmm. So understanding the rules and then operating within whatever the system is much more important.
I had a really good point, because obviously we either have a Republican or a Democratic president in office. And I could make, personally, if you have skill sets, how to navigate markets, you have real life skill sets, it doesn't matter if a Democrat president's office or a Republican president's in office. You can, if you're doing what you're supposed to do, you'll make money either way. Like, for example, like the markets. Like, when Biden was office, the markets are going astronomically high, right? Isn't like the S&P 500 all-time high, just boom, 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 and
that's been happening since the GFC.
Yeah.
Obama had the highest. Trump had the highest. Now Biden has the highest. Whoever the next president will be in 4 years, it'll probably be higher again.
Right.
So it's not a good barometer.
Do you think like Jeff Bezos cares who's in office?
Not in the least bit.
Not in the least bit.
Well, maybe him specifically, not in the least bit, but there are
Not
players.
as high as
There are high level players that are affected in a much different way than me and
Yeah.
you are. That certain regulations and certain voting patterns or certain legislations will have a profound impact on their bottom line, but it just makes them richer than they already are.
Yeah.
It's not like they're going to go broke if like the other
Mhm.
guy goes in. They're just going to be in the poorhouse. That's not the case.
Yeah.
It's greed. It's like, how much more can I have? Like if
Mhm.
this guy goes like Trump said it, I believe in the 2020 debate, or maybe it was the 2016 debates against Hillary Clinton, when she was calling out his like the system and how he like manipulated the system, and he's like, yeah, like I know the system better than anybody else because I manipulated it for my gain for 30 years. Like,
Yeah.
yes, and she's like, well, you didn't pay taxes. He's like, yeah, because I was smart. You know what I mean? You don't like that change the systems, but you won't, because all the people that are giving you money like the way that the tax system is because they're able to exploit it. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's the crazy part. Like, they have these, when it comes to finances and policies in regards to fiscal finance, like both sides have their alleged stances, but like there's only one way that's going to succeed, because they both have to have donors to support them, and the donors need a certain way for things to be, so the money keeps flowing. So it's all just a game, and at that
You have
that
to
stage.
double check and verify this. I think I just saw something on Twitter.
Don't
where
trust, verify.
Don't trust, verify. But they're charging 90% tax on, I think it was Europe or something insane, dude. Like literally, it's not like they're gonna go through it. That it was proposed. That's something I saw on my feed today, and I was like, "There's no way 90% of your income is getting taxed."
As recently, and Rich can jump in here to kind of help
yeah,
out
feel free.
this conversation. As recently as the Reagan administration, I want to say, because I think Reagan was the one that started to repeal some of that. I believe that there were tax brackets that were as high as 70%. Does that ring a bell, Rich?
I think so.
I think that they had income tax brackets as high as about 70%. So people were paying 70%.
Do you know any history about the Independence Day? I know we just got by 4th of July. Do you know like anything on the Independence Day and like the taxes that were like 2%?
Well,
And
it's
then-
not. It's the Revolutionary War.
Yeah.
The Revolutionary War
Yeah.
was fought over 2% taxes.
Yeah.
That's the Boston
Yeah, can
Tea
you talk
Party.
about that? Because I think that would be really
The Boston Tea Party, and Rich, you can jump into, because you're way more of a history buff than I am. The Boston Tea Party was basically a revolt over what would equate to around 2% taxes, and they were throwing tea into the harbor because they were pissed off about those 2% taxes. And even the modern day income tax, it's only 100 and something years. It's like 110 or 120 years old. It's not the entirety of the country. Like the country's, I think, what's it, 1770? We're like 250, 258 or some shit like that is what the country is now. Income taxes aren't 258 years old. Less than half of the time of this country's existence have we been paying income tax. And it was supposed to be a temporary tax. But once they realized that, we're taxing higher net worth, higher income people, well, let's trickle that down. And then realizing, well, we can just go all the way down the board, and then this temporary tax can now just be. It's the same ideology as like temporary suspending the convertibility of gold. It's like with temporary is over 60 years now. It's not
Yeah.
temporary. It's just what they do, and they just say it's temporary, and then they just make it permanent.
Yeah.
Rarely has ever been a temporary tax that's still not around. Here's my example. This is the best example that I can give for politics. Why it's a system, and I
Rich
vote.
Rich
and
loves this podcast now.
and I don't. I voted for presidents. I voted for Republicans. I voted for Democrats. a couple I thought were going to do a good job. And I'm 57, so I've been voting since I think, well, whatever, probably 86, when I was the first time I could vote. So here's my best example of what we do with what our politicians do. So Trump changed the IRS setup, and in my case, I got hurt because I no longer could itemize my deductions, because essentially they changed the level that made it worse to doing an itemized deduction, and I can't itemize anymore because I don't have enough that makes it worthwhile for me to itemize. And that's terrible.
It also affected mortgage interest too.
Right, because it affected, because then I couldn't deduct my interest, my mortgage interest, which takes the incentive off of me having a mortgage or having a home equity to invest in my property, because I'm not going to get anything for it. That's one of the things why you buy a house, why you have a home equity, why you want to use interest, because you can deduct it for those types of things. Yeah. So that was bad that he did that.
Good point.
But then we had a new president, and he didn't change it back. So he ran against it. Oh, you look what he did to the IRS.
Good
but
point.
You got in and he didn't change it.
Good point.
And it's like, so you said this was bad, and that should have been one of the things you fixed on day 1 or day 3, and you didn't fix it in your first 100 days.
Stop talking about it altogether.
Yeah, and then here's another example. Again, because I don't want to just focus on something a Republican did. I was kind of excited about Obama. I wanted a younger generation, someone who could appreciate things that I grew up with, because he's not that much older than me. So I liked Obama potentially. And I remember I was a public school teacher, and he came out in his first month and gave this big speech talking about, and I don't want to say what he talked about, what it was, but I was really, really impressed with the speech. And people bashed him for what he talked about, and he never talked about it again. And it was because he got bad press. And I'm like, you said you were going to be different, and the Hope poster and all that crap, and then as soon as you didn't get the response you thought you were going to get from the media, you never talked about it again.
I have a good theory. I want you to tell me what that was off camera too, if you don't want to say it on a public forum. I'm kind of curious, but I have a theory about Obama. 2008 is the first election I voted in, and I voted Obama. Believe it or not, because I'm a hardcore fiscal conservative today. Once I realized what politics were, at the time I just voted. I jumped on the hype train. I thought, okay, we got this cool hip black dude that's running for president. It's going to put a basketball court in the White House, dude. I want him to be the president. That's basically the extent of my voting for the dude, which is just completely ridiculously stupid. But that's how I was. And you make a very good point, because I think he potentially is one of the best speaking presidents we've ever had. That dude, the contrast between what we got right now and what we had with Obama is just like night and day. That dude could get a crowd just fired up based on how he spoke, and how he spoke at the 2004 convention is basically what got him the job.
Sure.
I think, and again, this is policy aside, you got to divorce yourself from the 8 years that he did from 08 to 16. I think he was extremely inexperienced. I don't think he understood what he signed up for at the time. And I think, and this is blasphemy to say as a fiscal conservative, but I really do feel this way. So I'll say it because I don't give a shit. I think if you got Obama now, you would get a better president than you got the 8 years you had with Obama. Because I don't think he was too young. He didn't know enough about politics yet to have balls to do things that needed to be done, and he relied on people that were manipulative at the time, and he went with the flow. And even though he had 4 years and he had the experience, I think now you would get a much better presidency from him because I think his 8 years were bad. I don't think he was a good president.
So here's my thing with the Hillary, and I agree with you. I think we're right on pace with that. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, I think the problem that I had with Obama is he rushed it. Yeah. He didn't know, he wasn't a political animal at the federal level. And I think if he would have done done a few more terms in the Senate and learned how it worked, and he could have controlled, because the two people that screwed him the most in his presidency were not Republicans. The two people that screwed him the most were Harry Reid, who was the Senate leader at the time, who was a Democrat, and what's her face, Nancy Pelosi, who was running the Congress. They pretty much said to him, and I don't know this for sure, but they pretty much said, listen, we're the real strength, and he let that happen. I think if he would have been a little bit more savvy, and this is the difference between him and Reagan. Reagan was so friggin' popular that he could walk in, and the Democrats did what he wanted because they wanted to be on his coattails for his popularity. He was the only president that won every state except one when he ran the second time. And, so he knew how to use his political clout. Obama had he had bags of clout because America was behind him, and then he didn't know how to run the political system because he was inexperienced. And that is a problem, because if he would have waited, and I totally am on board with you with that, if he would have waited, the problem was Hillary wanted to be president, and a lot of people did not want Hillary to be president, so they pushed him in. And I think, and everybody wanted him because partially because of the speech that he gave, but also because nobody wanted her. And they still say, if we would have just voted for, the Democrats, shit libs, quite often will say, well, if we would have just voted for Hillary, we would have never gotten Trump. And I said, but no, you should have never had, super delegates, and you should have never went after people that wanted to run against her in the primary, like Biden when he was much younger. If like Bernie,
you make
who
a good
would
point.
have won. Yeah. Bernie would have won against Trump.
If they would have had the big problem in 2016 was they didn't have a true organic primary. She was basically propelled to the nomination. It should have been Bernie, right? It definitely should have been Bernie, but nobody else besides Bernie.
It was a rigged
nobody
system.
besides Bernie had a fair shake. Bernie was the independent running as a Democrat. He was the outsider, but the actual Democrats, like you said, Biden and those other guys, they had no real chance. It was always going to be, the coronation was always going to be Hillary. So the only one that they had to worry about was Bernie, and Bernie had the momentum, and they basically super delegated his ass out of there. Yep. And Democrats that were hard, Bernie. People forget, the MAGA movement, Bernie had the movement before MAGA did. Yeah. Bernie's movement was, and again, I don't really subscribe to much of what Bernie gets behind, but the dude knew how to hustle. He knows how to run a campaign. He knows how to get people fired up.
Good or bad. I'm just saying that the system, and this is my problem. This isn't about, because when it all comes down to it, they're all pro. Talk about going to get canceled.
No, go ahead.
They're all pro something that I'm not going to say, because this is the stuff that scares me. Like the Star Chamber,
say it.
Illuminati bullshit that's going on in Gaza and Palestine with Israel is ridiculous. And people that have been anti this and anti the war in Russia against Ukraine and anti-apartheid, but for whatever reason, the amount of clout, I'm not saying Jewish people, I'm saying the amount that the influence that Israel has in our country, in our political system, it is just ridiculous that people aren't willing to call out the actions of the Israeli government against the Palestinian people. And regardless of what Hamas did some awful, terrible stuff, and they've been doing stuff for many years, but that doesn't allow, you can't point to bad behavior and say I'm allowed to do stuff. And this is going to cost Biden Michigan. Michigan will go to Trump because they are not going to elect Biden in Michigan. He's going to lose Michigan.
Last Thursday or 2 Thursdays ago was the nail in the coffin for Biden. If they trot him out, he can't win. It's impossible at this point.
I know. Have you been following what's been going on?
It does. Yeah. It does.
What's been going on in the last, today, for example, the lieutenant governor of New York State said, I don't even know the person's name, came out and exactly opposite of what Kathy Hochul, our governor, says, that Biden should step down, because they were polling in New York State that New York State could go Republican if Biden's the nominee.
I think that's a real possibility, honestly. I think
That's crazy.
because
Like
yeah,
New
that would
York
be
should be
wild.
New
That would
York
be
should be a
wild.
check in that
That'd
column
be
for
wild.
Democrats.
That would
That'd
be so
quite
wild if it happened.
You know,
What you saw Pelosi today was interviewed, and it's what she didn't say, because they were asking her straight up, and she was like, it's up to him. It's like, no, he's already said I
she
ain't
said,
going
let's
nowhere.
wait and see at the end of the week or something.
A couple people have said end of the week, so there's something that must be like in the works for like the weekend of like a standoff.
It's funny
per se.
because when your kids say, "Can we go for ice cream?" and we'll say, "We talk about it tomorrow,"
Yeah, we'll talk
or
about
like,
later.
We'll
Yeah.
talk about it later. That's kind of what she said.
But-
It's kind of like the way we talk to children.
But
You know,
every single one of the so-called backers of Biden right now have said the same thing, which is we got to let him decide or think about it. And it's like he's already on record all week, the last 2 weeks, saying I'm not going anywhere. So like, does he have to decide, or is there somebody behind the scenes that's going to decide for him?
the conventions
he
are
ain't
going to be
going
very.
nowhere.
Both conventions are going to be pretty interesting this year. Specifically, the Democratic
Democrats
one
for sure,
is going to
yeah.
be crazy because I think there is going to be. It's going to be crazy.
They can
like,
use the super delegates the same way they did in 2016 to oust him from the nomination.
There are several people that I think could do better than him. They've done some polling. Polling's tough nowadays because the way they do polling is very complicated because of social media and the cell phones and all that stuff. So it's very difficult to get accurate polling anymore. There are, especially when you think about the amount of polls that are out there. Most of them are just, who answers the phone type of thing, and who answers the phone. I mean, nobody under the age of 35 answers the phone. So it's goofy. I don't know. You can't go on polling, but there's definitely some deep dive stuff that's behind the scenes that they got to figure out something because. And he's supposed to be. Biden's doing an interview after? No. Tomorrow he has because he's doing
a press conference.
He's at the press conference tomorrow, and I think tomorrow is going to be very key. How he does in that press conference. I think there's going to be several things. Again, it's funny because we have one guy that's too old. We have another guy that's not that much younger. And I've seen that guy messes up as much. He said at one point, we got to, I beat Obama in the election. And he talked about World War II coming. And I was like, what? Like he had like the best Trump thing that happened to me that says that he's losing his marbles too. He was pointing at a guy in an audience, his doctor, that gave him a cognitive test, and he said, "Hey, it's Johnny Joe," or whatever he said. He got the guy's name wrong. He was referencing the guy in the audience that gave him a cognitive test, and he couldn't remember the name of the guy who gave him the cognitive test.
In 2020,
that's
he
crazy.
Was sharp in 2020.
He was sharp.
He was
in 2020.
Sharp. It's a little bit unfair to Trump to be like classifying him as bad as Biden. Like he's definitely had his missteps. He's definitely not as sharp as he was in 2020. But if you just look at, and again,
right.
I don't like Trump, and I've said this many times. Even though, do what you gotta do. Even though I'm a fiscal conservative, I don't consider myself a Republican because I think the Republican Party is just as shitty as the Democrat Party.
Well, they're
so
not fiscally conservative anymore.
So they're not, and Trump is not a fiscal conservative. And anybody that wants to argue that point doesn't understand what conservative.
Well, just look at how much money they spend on the debt and what he did. With taxes,
it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist in politics anymore.
No.
Actual conservative.
They're all
fiscal
money.
Conservative. But when you talk about just based on can the dude function coherently compared to the other guy, like, yeah, he's got his fumbles, but you also have to remember, like, these dudes are like, they're speaking all the time. They're always in public. They're always on the spot. They're always being recorded. You're going to make your mistakes.
For sure.
Again, he's making more than he's made ever before, but I don't think we're anywhere in the neighborhood. And I don't think it's very fair to say that he's also like, that's what a lot of the Biden supporters and a lot of the Biden side are like, oh, look at Trump. He's messing up this word. And it's like, yeah, dude, like he can go like 16 minutes, like having coherent sentences, and then he screws up for like 3 or 4 minutes.
Let me clarify my point because I want to say.
No, you're making a good point. And I agree with it. I'm just
my
saying
point is though, my bigger point is that yes, but I also remember this in '84 when Reagan was starting to fumble and he was going to be elected again, and he was younger. And I remember at the time we didn't know what dementia and stuff was back in 1984.
Good point.
But a lot of us were very concerned that Reagan was starting to lose it because he was getting older. And sure enough, a few years after his second term, Nancy
bad
took
shape.
him out and said we have to take him out of the public light because he just basically, and he did his last kind of, and then disappeared from thing because
And he was
so clearly
early
2 years.
70s. He was early 70s.
Yes, he was early, but he clearly was suffering from dementia.
Yeah.
Probably whatever it was, dementia or Alzheimer's. I don't remember exactly what it was, but he was having mental, cognitive decline in his second presidency. And my point comes down to this, and this is the point I guess I should have started with. We got to stop electing these old people. There's got to be a cutoff.
100%.
Like my dad retired at 66, and he was the sharpest guy in the world. By 70, he was still pretty damn sharp, but he was also just playing with his grandkids and doing his taxes. He shouldn't have been running he shouldn't be as far as my dad was one of the sharpest guys ever at 80. But you know what? But running the country is something that should not be doing when you've got that level of stress at that age. Like it's crazy.
Rich, I want to share this real quick before I forget it because I think it's important. I'm listening. I'm at my son's baseball practice in the parking lot yesterday. I'm listening to Fox News. I'm actually going back and forth between Fox and CNN because one is better than the other, just bashing, like going after Biden and all. It's entertainment. So I'm like going commercial break. I'm going from one to the other. So I happen to be on Fox News listening to them speak, and they're doing their spiel about how old Biden is and about how bad. And then literally right before the segment ends, they do a condolences RIP to a former senator that passed away yesterday. And they're like, he's the longest serving senator from whatever state. I can't remember the state because I was half paying attention until they said his age. They're like, yeah, he served from 1990 until 2023 and died at the age of 86. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? This fucking asshole was serving until 85. You guys are bashing Biden at 82 years old. Granted, he's a mess, but like, and then you're like, this dude was in Congress until 85.
In a wheelchair. She didn't know what she was voting on. Like what's his face, the leader of the Senate. I mean, Mitch McConnell.
Dude had 2 seizures in the middle.
He literally froze. We had to unplug him and plug him back in a couple times.
He was buffering.
I'm like, you know what? It's like it's ridiculous. It's like who is the Yankee? Who is the guy that was a retired Yankee? And like he was in his like 80s or 90s, and his son would bring him to these like card shows, and they would prop this old guy up and they would make him sign cards, and it was like he was a legendary baseball, and I don't know baseball, but I remember my dad telling me about it. Like this was like 20 years ago, and my father was just like horrified that they wouldn't let this guy just be old in peace,
Go off to the pasture
and just not stop trying to use your dad as like a cash cow. And I feel like that's what we do with these politicians, whether it's their families or their handlers or whatever it is. And it's Biden, it's Feinstein, it's any of them. They just let these people retire and enjoy the couple of years before they die.
You should not be allowed to be a public servant and serve in the capacity of legislation and making laws for people if you're past 80 years old. It's just, and I mean, not even just president. Like
you shouldn't be in the Supreme Court.
They're asking Nancy Pelosi about Joe Biden, and Nancy Pelosi's 3 years older than Joe Biden. And she just gave up the gavel, like what, a couple of years ago?
Yeah.
2 years ago, 22, gave the gavel up. Like this, what are we doing here? Chuck Grassley's like 140.
Yeah,
and that dude's in Congress, or Senate, or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's
makes
incredibly
no sense.
It's incredibly sad too, because like I would hope that like someone in their family would have enough respect for them to say, you know what, like you've done your bit for king and country, just like sit on the porch and drink lemonade and watch Matlock. Like let them enjoy.
And it's not a Republican thing. It's not a Democrat
thing.
No.
And again, I think that we're all clear.
Kentucky is still out there voting for this guy that's Mitch McConnell, who's half dead. They were voting for Feinstein in California. They still vote for Pelosi in California. Chuck Grass, wherever the hell he's from, he's 179 years old, and they still vote for him every year. You can't find a better option.
I'll bash both sides all day long.
You're a voter, and you're like, hey, the best option is Chuck Grassley, who's 149
what's her face
years
on
old.
the Supreme Court?
Here?
She had cancer, and they told her to stay on the Supreme Court. And then, because they didn't want her to retire,
was
and
that Sotomayor or whatever?
Yeah. No, the
RGB.
Ruth
Bader Ginsburg. Yeah.
They made her stay on the court. She died, and they ended up like, okay, so you're her people, whether it was her family, whether it was her assistants, whoever it was in her life, said stay on the court, and then like instead of we ended up, the Democrats, I don't want to say we because I'm not Democrat. I'm not a registered any party. People that wanted her on the Supreme Court, those people lost that seat on the Supreme Court because they didn't know when it was time for her to retire with dignity. Like people should be retiring with dignity within a period of time instead of being manipulated in their old age.
How about John McCain, who I think is one of the last decent public servants that we've had? I think that moment with Obama when that lady was trying to like bash Obama and he cut her right off and said, he's a decent man. Like that was one of the last decent moments we've had in the presidential election cycle, and I think overall he was a decent dude. And the cratering for me with Trump was when he went after him and like really went hard at him and like called him out for being a fake whatever the hell he said.
Or like he got shot down and like my pilot's not getting shot down.
Even all that,
like
and I think he was a great public servant. But even with that aside, he's dying of cancer, and they basically just let him die out so they didn't give up that seat.
And the funny
Who
thing
cares about
it
the
is,
voters? It's like, no, we're not giving the seat up.
Like,
He's gonna.
I don't think they're special elections. So, like, to me, there's a simple system for that. If you're a Republican or Democrat and that person leaves that seat, especially for a senator because it's a longer term, you get to appoint somebody, and then that person's in that seat, so they have a chance to become the incumbent.
Yeah.
So rarely, unless you put in someone who's an idiot, usually you're able to hold on to that seat if you appoint the person, because then the person's in for a while, they get the backing, they get the money, they're able to stay in. But like there's this thing that they do. But here's the problem with all of it. Like again, like you don't, there's always been, well, vote for my guy or my gal because they're not as bad as that one. And then people fall for that, and this is both sides all the time. And they're like, but then once the election's done, they're like, but we're not going to really do anything. Neither one of these parties, like the Democratic Party is not really what they try to represent politically. They're not.
Neither party.
They're
is.
not the party of the
Neither
left.
Republicans.
They're not the Republicans either. They're not conservative. That's why what happened in France. Did you see what happened in France? So did you follow what happened in France?
Yeah, it was a fucking mess. They had like 2 elections in like at the same day or some shit. It was crazy.
So they have a great system there because, first of all, the presidents, prime ministers in most of European countries don't have any clout. They can get kicked off for like knocking over a can of garbage. So like in France, Macron was the guy that was elected, and I think he lost and against the ultra conservative guy that was running. And he was the liberal guy that was, he was their version. I think the Labor Party is what they call it, was their guy. And then what happened was everybody thought that the ultra right guy was going to get in. But instead what happened is all these people voted for the ultra left guy. So both of the people that thought were going to be the prime minister both lost. And now it's the ultra left guy. Somehow the ultra left organized folks got in and organized better than the other ones did. So everybody was worried about France going ultra right. Now they're ultra left. Now I don't know what will last because that's the way European, because like Labor, my favorite one was the English prime minister. That woman that got in, and this is the funniest thing. I wish we would do this. That's why I like English politics sometimes, because
they have to get in the middle of Parliament and argue. Like,
they have to literally. They can't hide. They have to go in there. They get yelled at, and people are screaming at them.
Yeah.
This woman that they put in, there was a thing where they went to the day that she got elected as the PM. They went to like a vegetable stand and bought a head of cabbage. And they said, let's see which lasts longer, this woman or the head of cabbage. And guess what lasted longer in terms of the cabbage lasted longer. That woman ended up doing like 3 weeks. The cabbage was in better shape than she was. And I do like sometimes the European political system, sometimes because they don't have the strong president, prime minister model.
And it's
it's very easy to get kicked out.
It's actually democratic. It's actually the people actually have a better say.
Yeah.
And like in this country, it's like, oh, we're the freest. We have the best democracy. It's like, what democracy?
Yeah.
You got a dude who's eating ice cream who should be in assisted living or a nursing home, and you have people in the party saying, yo, we have better options, right?
Yeah.
There's other people.
The Electoral College is a joke that we don't
Yeah,
have.
and the president who everybody around him is saying you are unfit to be president, is saying no, I'm fine. And we're just like, oh, well, listen to the voters. The voters made their choice in the primaries. He never debated in the primaries. You don't see
And
any
nobody
of this
ran
stuff
against
that you see.
either one of them, really. I mean, what's her face
Dean
ran
Phillips,
against
or whatever the hell his name.
what's
Phillips.
her name?
I think it's Dean Phillips is his name.
Yeah, but and the woman that ran
primaried him.
against Trump for a couple months. With
Can you imagine if they would have
Nikki Haley.
allowed? Can you imagine if they would have allowed RFK on the debate stage and CNN that CNN debate stage? How that would have played out?
it would have been an
He would have.
episode- there
You
been
know
an
how
episode
good he
of
would have
Ancient
looked.
Aliens or
You know how
something.
good he would have looked.
No, he would have looked great.
That could have been an
he's
election
nuts.
turner.
He's
I
nuts,
think so.
but-
He is, but
he would have done much better. And he's got that stupid. And we might elect him because his last name's Kennedy. Like.
I mean, I think if he was on that stage and you have the convicted felon on one side, you have the bumbling idiot that should be in a nursing home on the other side, and then you have Kennedy, and you're like, well, he looks. It's like the 5 with the 2 1s. The 5 looks like a 10.
And
you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I mean, it's very incredibly frustrating, and I'm really hoping that, like, Troy, your generation, when your generation starts getting elected to positions, that your generation doesn't do what my generation did. We're like, I hated the way they did it, and we were worse than the previous generation in terms of folks that got into politics. We were worse. And by people that are in their 50s, that's what I mean. Like, I'm not super fond of the people that are 50 and older that are in politics right now. I'm hoping that as the younger folks get in, that they really make changes to the system. That they've really got to make changes to the system. If younger people could, I mean, look what they did in the previous election. If younger people vote, and I don't think they're going to vote this time. I think the younger people are going to stay home because they're really mad at both parties. And they really kind of, and both parties really kind of, I mean, someone's got to win, but I wish neither one of them
getting back
would.
to the whole point of like talking about this, like I think we can make a statement as Americans that we've had enough. Like, you are putting forth candidates in elections that have no business making decisions for us. Therefore, you don't get my vote. Like, I don't understand this ideology of like I have to. It's like if I go to the store and I'm looking for something and I'm shopping, right? Let's say I go to Target and I'm looking for something specific. Because I walked in Target, I have to buy something and walk out with something. No, I came for something, I didn't see it, and I left the fucking store with nothing. Because I didn't have what I wanted.
The devil's.
I'm saying you're not putting forth good options for me. Therefore, I'm not participating in your election. And if you have this like massive amount of people that don't turn out, then they're going to be like, listen, like this is too crazy. Like there's so many people that go out that they can sway elections and they can manipulate things because you have this swath of people going out and they can do these little things. They got to concentrate on 2 or 3 states to basically sway the election because like Rich said, like if New York flipped, that would just put everything on its head. If New York went red and they were like, oh my God, we have to actually go to these other states. Because watch, when October, November come, where are they at? Those 5 states, right?
The
They'll
seven
show up
there's
for a
there's
second
about
here.
7
There's
states,
like 7
but by
states,
then
but
it
there's
gets
50
down to
states
about
in the
5.
country, so
Yeah.
43 states are
Wisconsin,
like, we don't care about
Michigan,
you.
Pennsylvania,
You mean nothing.
Georgia.
You don't mean anything. So go there,
Right.
get your sticker, get your I voted sticker, put it on your chest like you feel like you did something. But guess what? You don't mean shit because your state's going blue. Texas is going red. New York's going blue. California's going blue. Indiana's going blue. Half the South's going red. Like, it's just, that's what it is. Oh, you got Ohio. You got Pennsylvania. You got
Wisconsin and Michigan.
Wisconsin. You have Michigan. Like, those are the states that matter. So if you had 90% of the population say, we're not voting, and you just looked at the electoral map and it just looked all kinds of crazy, it would have to make them go right back to the drawing board. They'd be like, yo, the old way of doing things where it only mattered in 7 states, yo, this thing matters everywhere now.
More
we gotta
importantly,
do shit
if
different.
people would just, if people
That's
just,
why people
this
need to
is
stay
really
home.
because it's all about the economy, stupid, which is one of the best political lines ever. If people just stop donating, if everybody just said, I'm not donating to your party I'm going to donate my money to charity for a year, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party would both collapse. Obviously there's a lot of corporate donations to both, but they do need all those other donations. And if they would know that they've got to put up some different candidates, in my mind. So if people stop donating to these parties and stop volunteering and going to rallies and all those things, and stop, going and putting posters and signing petitions, all that stuff. If they stayed out of the local, go and help your local congressman. Go and help your mayor, your city council guy, your school board. Go do those things. But in terms of the national stuff, if everybody kind of walked away from the national stuff for a little while, it would take a while. It would take a couple things. Here's the thing. Everybody gets so nervous, and I think this is a very important election. But I'm old, and I feel like I've heard that this is the most important election of our lives every time. Here's the thing. I don't think either one of them will end up with both houses. So if they don't get both houses, they don't do shit anyway. Because if you don't have the House and the Senate, you can't pass anything. You just can't. So as long as neither one of these people end up with both the House and the Senate, and I don't think they'll get both, either one of them, nothing terrible will happen. And even if they did, and if they do all these terrible, terrible things, which I think some of them want to do, in 2 years, guess what happens? A bunch of senators flip, a bunch of congressional seats flip, because that's usually what happens anyway, and then they don't have any control. So the worst case scenario is we get some bad shit for a couple of years, and then in 2 years everything just gets, and then we get lame duck president, whatever it is, in 2 years anyway, and then we start this shit all over, and hopefully the next group of people are a lot younger and maybe start to realize the mistakes of this generation that's currently running everything. That's, to me, that's the optimistic side of me. But I've been let down before.
I'm gonna grab a beer.
So
I gotta get going. So
This is a beer-worthy conversation.
no, because I got a Zoom call. I didn't think we were gonna start this late.
and I got to apologize for that.
No, it's
That's
okay.
on me.
No, it's okay. I'm gonna so. That's last time I did it.
Yep.
Yeah, so I gotta get going, but
Okay.
thank you though.
Yep. Well, what I'm going to do is I'll end the live stream, but I'll keep recording so
that's
you can
fine.
have
yeah,
the.
that's fine. Don's getting fired up. He's grabbing his beer. I'm excited to see.
Yep. Talk to you soon.
All right, man. You out? Yeah, you get going.
All right, man.
I'm actually nervous to see.
I took down the.
Beer,
I'm still recording, but I took down the live stream
Yeah.
because I figured with that little bit